Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today and for your interest in learning more about the current status of spotted lanternfly detection and how detection dogs are helping in this effort. My name is Amy Jewett, and I am the Pennsylvania IMAP Invasives Program Coordinator with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program, and I'm based in the Pittsburgh region. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Jennifer Essler of SUNY Cobleskill. Before I introduce Jenny, I do want to mention that today's webinar will be recorded and that all registrants will receive a link to the recording. Also, there is a Q&A feature enabled on today's webinar, so please feel free to type in your questions at any time, and we will take some time at the very end of our webinar to answer any questions that we receive. Now I'd like to take a moment and introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Jennifer Essler. Jenny Essler is currently an assistant professor in the Canine Department at SUNY Cobleskill in New York. She received her PhD in comparative cognition from the University of Veterinary Medicine in Vienna, Austria, where she researched the evolution of cooperation between dogs and wolves. After that, she completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the Penn Vet Working Dog Center at the University of Pennsylvania, where she researched the development of working dogs and various detection studies. Today, she will be talking about her work on spotted lanternfly detection by working dogs. So thank you so much for being here, Jenny, and I will hand things over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for having me. It's been a minute since I got to talk about SLF. Like you said, I'm a professor in New York now, but the work I'll be talking about today was done at the Penn Vet Working Dog Center in Pennsylvania. So it has been a minute, but still obviously quite relevant. So just for some background, though, I suppose if you're coming to a presentation like this, you might know some of this already, so I apologize in advance. So the spotted lanternfly, it's a plant hopper insect native to China, India, and Vietnam. So if you haven't had the interesting experience of interacting with these guys, they do quite literally hop. Anecdotal, interesting thing, when these finally kind of reached our area in Philly, the dogs found them very interesting because they kind of move in very weird ways. And I had never interacted with a plant hopper species that I'm aware of. They kind of work a little bit like grasshoppers if they flew at the end. But of course, these guys are invasive. They came to the US, first seen in Pennsylvania, 2014. When we started this study, they hadn't made it to Philly yet. Obviously, they have now. When I moved to New York, I think they hadn't at least been officially seen yet, though they certainly have now, and they have quite the spread. There's even, I think, a little group that somehow got down into Virginia, and so it's become kind of quite a group effort amongst a lot of different groups and states to try and research these guys and how we can keep them from spreading. They have kind of an interesting life cycle, at least for me, not being a bug person. Had to learn about this to kind of think about how we could use the dogs. So they lay eggs in one season, sort of September to early November. They typically lay these eggs on trees. They can be found on other substrates. So when the spotted lanternfly came to Philly, which was the first time we got to interact with them other than just having eggs sent to us, we got to actually see this firsthand. So we have tons of trees around the area. They certainly covered the trees with eggs, but they also kind of covered anything under it. I didn't see it as much as on cars or metal things. They certainly did. But like, for example, we had wood pallets underneath the trees that we used for the dogs in search and rescue, and those would just get absolutely covered. So they do tend to put the eggs on trees and kind of quite high up if they can, but definitely are quite generalists in where it's going to go. And then once they lay their eggs, they end up having a brown with light covering. So the picture you see here is actually a picture, funnily enough, that I took while I was walking Toby, who was used in the study. And it was a adult spotted lanternfly actually putting the eggs down. And so when they're fresh, They look like this bright white kind of gummy thing, and they're pretty easy to see, but they do overwinter, and once they get that brown mud-like covering, they're significantly harder to see, especially if you're not in an area that's kind of inundated with them. Once you have these guys in large amounts, you kind of can't miss them. But certainly if you just have a couple of these egg coverings, can be difficult. And then once these eggs are laid, they overwinter. So they just kind of exist on the trees over winter. They completely survive the winter. And then once they hatch, they're seen in May. And so you kind of have an interesting period of time where, of course, the spotted lanternfly exists, but in egg form. And so they're not transferring themselves, right? If they're moving around the country at this time, it's sort of humans moving them, right? They're on trains or cars or something else that's kind of moving them in and out. And this was kind of the thought process for using dogs for this, was that there's a large period of time where there are these target odors that are containable in a way that, you know, if we could maybe use dogs to intervene there, it could really help. So this is kind of the overview of what they look like. So I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this top middle one, this nymph early stage, this black and white spotted, they're actually quite small, like very, very small. And these guys are pretty good at moving. When we try to catch some, they can be very evasive. But that's what you see at the beginning. Then that middle bottom one is kind of what they turn into, and then they slowly turn into those top and bottom left side ones, which is what people typically see or think of, I suppose, when you think about a spotted lanternfly, or when you think about telling people to kill them if you see them. It's really those left ones. And it's quite unfortunate, actually, because I remember when we first started doing this project, actually, I had never worked in anything with invasive species, certainly, but it's interesting because if you had asked me that bottom left one, you know, would you kill this? Maybe not. They're quite impressive looking, actually, but obviously they do quite a bit of damage. And then you can see on the right side there the comparison. So the top right side being that sort of white covering that's very, very easy to see. And then that bottom right one, once they get older, they really just kind of blend in with the bark, which makes them much, much harder to see. And so, you know, maybe dogs could be a place where we can use a different sense to find them. So why are they such a problem, aside from the fact that you never really want invasive species to be anywhere if they don't have to be? They feed on a lot of plants. They are generalist feeders, somewhat to the extreme. So at least 75 different species of plants. I don't know of one that they don't eat. And this is anything from crops to vines to woody trees. And so it's really quite broad. So it's not like they come into an area and they're only seen on a couple of trees and all the other trees survive. You know, we did see to some extent, because we have the tree of heaven, which is also invasive. They did tend to prefer those, but once in our area, at least, and this is probably true for most, you know, once these insects came into an area, they really take over everything. So they were on every single tree. And they also really like grapevines. Of course, this is a big problem if you work in a field that uses those, in an industry that uses those. And basically what happens is, I should have put a picture here for people who haven't seen it, is really like thousands, hundreds of thousands of these insects kind of amass on the trees. And it's not like, you know, a few insects per tree. It's like hundreds of thousands per trees. It almost looks like the tree just becomes this mass of spotted lanternflies. And they feed on the phlegm of the trees, which is obviously a problem for that tree. It tends to weaken the tree. It makes them more vulnerable to anything sort of like a lowering the immune system type thing. And then the honeydew, which is their excrement, causes this sort of sooty mold. And so the bottoms of these trees end up sticky and moldy and not good. And this can attract other insects. And then, of course, because the spotted lanternflies do tend to prefer, when they can, going higher up, any of that sooty mold that ends up sort of in the middle or anywhere that the tree would need that area for photosynthesis, it affects them for photosynthesis. So I remember when we first started working on this study, as someone who doesn't know a lot about insects, I was thinking, you know, the insects feeding on the phlegm would be the major issue, and certainly it's a problem. But a lot of people that I talked to really were talking about this sort of sooty mold that they cause and how that can affect the trees not surviving that sort of invasion. Aside from us just liking trees not dying, of course, there's been a massive impact on a lot of different industries for these guys. And all of these things that I'm citing, I do have a reference sheet at the end, but this specifically is from a summary that was put out by the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. So this was, I think, 2017. So it's more since then. But they estimated that annually it was affecting about 100 million in the agriculture and 236 million in forestry. So obviously that is a huge economic impact. And sort of where is that happening? So really vineyards are quite particularly vulnerable because aside again from the spotted lanternfly preferring the tree of heaven, they also really have a preference for grapevines. And so in vineyards and industries that use grapes or vines like this, the SLF coming to the area is a really, really big problem. And of course, this was 2017. This was just Pennsylvania. So since those assessments, of course, they have spread relatively prolifically in the areas they have. And so it's very possible and likely and almost 100% that the actual economic impacts of this species, not just within Pennsylvania, but within the other states where they have spread, obviously it's quite a lot more. I know in New York now that they've spread here, even with people that don't know that I've worked with SLF, you know, they'll bring it up just because that's really how important it's become to talk about these guys, because it's affecting so many industries. So yes, they look very pretty, but they are doing a lot of damage to a lot of industries. So we saw this opportunity, and by we I should say sort of the Penn Vet Working Dog Center and Cindy Otto. You know, we train detection dogs for lots of different things. The main study that I had worked on prior to this actually was using detection dogs to study the possibility of making like an electronic nose for ovarian cancer in blood plasma. And so not related, but sort of related in the sense that how can we use dogs to solve problems that humans have? And certainly prior to this, dogs had already been used in many areas of wildlife detection. So even if you don't consider that we use dogs as sort of the best sensors for things like explosives and drugs, and certainly in search and rescue, they actually are quite heavily used in lots of areas of wildlife detection. So anything from invasive species like we're talking about today to species at risk and, you know, lots of different areas. And so it wasn't so far-fetched to consider, you know, could we use dogs for this? So one example, you can see it on the right, there's this citrus greening disease that affects crops, and dogs were trained and used to detect it before humans can see it visually, or even sort of molecular models could assess whether it was seen in the trees. And so this was in my mind, a close thing, because it was something that the dog is searching for that you can't necessarily see, and certainly before any human methods can find it. For us, because we started this study, unfortunately didn't end this study, not inside of the quarantine zone. So we actually were in an area where we could not just get spotted lanternfly eggs. We didn't really have a training aid. And so this was a big issue, because of course, the groups that we were working with didn't just want to send us eggs, right? Like that's kind of what we're working against. And I remember when we first started talking about this project, there was this whole discussion on like, oh, well, will Jenny have to learn how to, you know, keep a enclosure of spotted lanternflies to just like harness the eggs somehow. Of course, I'm so thankful we didn't go that route, but also would have been very unsafe for us to do that, at least in terms of not trying to spread the eggs. And of course, as I said, they overwinter, so it's not like if you leave them outside, they die. So of course, the biggest issue, just for anyone generally, the eggs are only found certain times of the year. So I can't just get eggs in the summer, notwithstanding maybe laboratories that have found ways around this. But if I'm trying to find my training aids in the wild, they don't exist outside of a certain set period. And then we thought, well, maybe we can have them send us dead eggs. But if I train the dogs on dead eggs, will they find live eggs? So if I spend all this time training my dog up on finding eggs that I have made non-viable, will they be able to find it? We don't really know. Of course, that would be optimal, but who knows? And if I find that my dogs can't train on dead eggs and then transfer to live eggs, and I have to find a way to use live eggs, the last sort of question would be, how do I train on these live eggs or use these live eggs while avoiding the accidental spread? So, we do the best that we can in all scenarios of life and not transferring things around. But, I remember, for example, when we had the spotted lanternflies around the center, of course, people had cars coming in and out, and there would have been no way to fully check your car to see. And so even though you're doing the best you can, mistakes can happen. And so we were thinking, if we actually got to the point where we had to use live eggs, what would we do? So we ended up using 3 dogs for this study. So Toby on the left is a small Munsterlander. If you hear a random scratch in the background, that's him scratching at my door. Pacey in the middle, Labrador Retriever. She actually was a graduate of the Working Dog Center, and she was a certified human remains detection dog. So she had a lot of experience in detection. And then Grizzly, German Shepherd dog on the right, was used for a lot of studies, but he was a personal dog of one of the trainers at the center. And so our first aim for the study was to find a training aids. Like I said, we weren't in the quarantine zone. I was heavily trying to avoid having to upkeep a colony of spotted lanternflies at the lab. And so we wanted to train the dogs on dead eggs and egg masses, and help them learn to distinguish this from any background odor. So of course, the eggs do not just exist in a vacuum, they're on trees and other things. And so we have to ensure that the dogs are really finding and giving that final response of, hey, it's here, on the eggs and not on anything else that we might accidentally tell them is there. And then if they can get to the point where they are saying, or we are saying, yes, we trust the dogs to find these dead eggs, can we then transfer them to live eggs? So if I train the dogs on dead eggs, do they immediately transfer to live eggs? Does it take a little bit of time? What is that transfer? And this is especially important, and again, if you're someone who lives outside of the quarantine zone, and you can't get live eggs or shouldn't get live eggs, or even if you're just someone that does not want to keep live eggs around. This was kind of our second question. So for this, we acquired some dead eggs. So these were sent to us by a separate lab, and they were frozen in a -80 Celsius freezer for a long time, almost 100 hours. And initially they were actually also heat treated. We, I think, weren't totally sure what would kill them. Of course, because they overwinter, simple cold does not kill them. So you really have to leave them in a quite deep freezer for a number of days. And so we worked with both egg masses, which you see on the right here. So it's an egg mass on bark, and also sort of scraped eggs. So what you see on the left here, which is just eggs that are scraped off of the bark. These guys were kept in mason jars in a refrigerator. So each different sample had its own mason jar. When they weren't being used, they were just in the refrigerator, which was great. yeah, like I said, they were trained on both the egg masses and the scraped eggs. So I'll talk about it a bit later what we ended up using for Lucky, but we really wanted to train them on both the eggs and egg masses on bark because you know, if this ever got to the point where the dogs were actually working outside of the lab, they would be seeing the egg masses on bark. So this was really important to us. And then of course the dogs had to learn not just to find the spotted lanternfly eggs, but to ignore everything else. So of course the most critical one is the tree bark. And so when we were given the samples from these other areas, the researchers who gave us those samples of the bark with the eggs on it also took a piece of the bark from the same exact tree. Because I am not a tree expert and I wanted to make sure that the dogs were ignoring all different types of trees. And that was important because some of them did give dogs more trouble than others. And then aside from the bark, which is the most obvious one, we also put anything else that could have touched the egg. So we know dogs have a really low odor threshold. And so we didn't want them to attune into any odor that might have come from gloves that touched it. Cardboard that was used to ship it. We use a lot of these little scrapers that have been used to pull the eggs off. And really just anything we could consider that the dogs might have used to solve this game other than the SLF. And so this is a video of the dogs. And I will tell you at the beginning, actually, I think I do know how to put sound here. Hold on. Hopefully this works. And so what you see here is our scent wheel. You can see that just these 3 ports have odor in them. And this was just to get them sort of introduced to the odor. And again, when we first started this, we weren't totally sure if it was going to work. And so when we got here, it was kind of a trial and error. Hopefully this sound's working. So this is Grizzly. He was the first one we used, and that is him passing the SLF after we had tried to imprint him elsewhere. So we had taken these ports out, we gave it to him to sniff, we clicked it, and he got rewarded. And then we put it in the scent wheel, and they didn't seem to get it, you know, and so we clicked when they sniffed it, but we weren't really seeing any change of behavior. Same thing with Pacey. We didn't see any change of behavior at all. And we're laughing just because they're searching beyond the 3 ports. But basically after Grizzly and Pacey, we were really not sure if the dogs were going to be able to do this, which I found kind of an interesting concept because they were able to find blood plasma at very, very low levels. But basically Grizzly and Pacey kind of didn't really get it. And then Toby came in and kind of nailed it. And that was when we were like, okay, maybe this can work. Again, we weren't totally sure because just one dog doing it made us a little bit nervous for the sort of generalizability of the concept. But he did really well. And so we were very hopeful. And so you can see Toby here. It's also a little bit slower, but you can see he kind of gives a pause at the odor without us having to give him any help. And so we were able to show that even though the dogs did struggle initially, they were able to find the odor. And so, you know, we had to get a little bit creative and maybe a little bit patient with some of the dogs. But they did do it, and they were able to do it even while ignoring the background odors. So it's not like they could just find anything with bark on it. It was actually very specifically the SLF eggs. And so just because it's a academic talk, I have some graphs. So what you see here is Grizzly's sensitivity and specificity. So sensitivity would be how good he was at finding the SLF eggs. So talking about just the target odor. And that's the blue here. And so you can see at the beginning, he starts at about 50%. So basically guessing, but then over the course of a couple of days, multiple days, multiple sessions, he gets up quite high and he kind of bounces between 90 and 100%. And that's great, right? We want them to be able to find the SLF eggs, but we also care about them ignoring the other odors. And that's what you see here with the orange, orange line. That's their specificity. So how good they also do at ignoring their non-targets. And so what you want a really high rate of both sensitivity and specificity, which is thankfully what we ended up seeing in Grizzly here. And he ended up actually being a quite good dog at this study. And I'll explain why in the second part. This is Pacey. She did less well. She was, unfortunately, she passed, a kind of very crazy dog. So again, like I said, she was a search and rescue dog. She was not slow at searching odor. And I think that made the task quite difficult for her because it was a very kind of low amount of odor. And so she did struggle a little bit. Which goes to a whole nother presentation on how you choose the best dogs for the best task. But then we have Toby, who also did quite well. It took him a little bit longer than Grizzly, but he got up there kind of bouncing between 90 and 100%, which is really what you're looking for. And so we did find that over the course of about 25 sessions, the dogs were able to become quite proficient at the odors and really even earlier than 25. The 25 was really to ensure that we were presenting lots of different egg masses, lots of different controls, and especially lots of different barks. So it's not like we threw 100 different barks at them on day one. It was sort of over the course of a number of weeks. So it's not like it takes 25 sessions to train a dog on this, but to do it academically and for a paper, it does. And so our second goal, we have these dogs, they're trained on dead eggs. That's great, lovely. But it doesn't really matter, right, unless they can transfer that to live eggs, because we don't really need them finding dead eggs in the wild. And so basically we presented the dogs with live eggs and egg masses that had been taken from outside, because again, over the course of this study, unfortunately, the spotted lanternfly did spread to Philly. And so we were able to, unfortunately, kind of find the eggs outside. And so I didn't end up with a sort of vivarium of spotted lanternflies, but I did end up with a lot of gardening tools to find all of these things. And we used a double blind testing. So nobody in the room knew if the eggs were there or where the masses were if they were there. So the dogs were actually trained to perform what we called blank wheels, where they'd go around that scent wheel and no odor would be there and they'd leave. And sort of this is to help them against just guessing. So if they think the odor is always there, that they might start guessing. And so we just took these fresh eggs, these fresh egg masses, along with some fresh bark, put it in, and we just looked at what the dogs did. So again, this was Grizzly, quite good at the dead eggs. And then when we presented him with the live eggs, still quite good. Very, very tiny little drop here, but not anything uncommon from his other sort of days on the wheel. But he got quite good over a few sessions. And unfortunately, we did have to end this at some point around 35, and that was because COVID hit. And so we might have kept going and tested more things, but he did very, very well. Pacey actually did better with the live than with the dead eggs. I'm not sure why. I'm not a chemist, so I couldn't explain to you the exact what's exactly going on with the odor differences there. But she ended up doing pretty good. And then Toby did very well. So again, small dip at the beginning here, which is not uncommon when sort of transferring to a different odor, but became very, very good at the end, 100% for a number of days, which is excellent. So it did seem like, all of the dogs were able to very, very quickly transfer from from dead to live eggs, which is great. Like that's what we wanted. Can we use dead eggs to train dogs on to find live eggs, which would allow anyone who's working on this outside of the quarantine zone, or anyone who's working on this that just doesn't want to work with live eggs all the time, they can have sort of backup training aids of dead eggs. So this was a really, really nice thing. and potentially if COVID hadn't hit, might have gone in other directions. But before COVID hit, we were very lucky because, you know, we briefly wanted to answer, you know, what about in real life, right? So once the eggs are in the lab and they're in the scent wheel, we already know the eggs are here. And so again, just like if dogs can find dead eggs, it's not really helpful unless they can find live eggs. Kind of the second step, even if they can find live eggs in the wheel, unless they can find them outside of the wheel where the odor is sort of concentrated and in a jar and very close in front of them, you know, can they search outside and find them outside of the lab? And so I have a video because we didn't end up publishing this again because COVID hit, but we did start looking at the dog's ability to find eggs sort of outside of the wheel. So we started on this scent wall, which is just a bunch of odors in the wall to look at them hitting things outside of the wheel. And again, this is Toby. All these dogs had already been trained to search outside other odors, but we weren't sure if this odor would work really well. And of course, we always try and work to keep any human trying to influence them, which is very hard, right? If I know where the odor is, it's hard for me to make sure my body language doesn't convince him to search something just because I know it's there. But they did really well. So of course, this is Toby. I think this is the last one for Toby. And so he just has a freeze alert. So he doesn't sit or do anything. He just freezes. And then Pacey, again, a little bit crazier, but certainly a change of behavior on odor. Sorry if that's a little too loud. And so they're doing kind of the same sort of hides that I was doing with Toby. Actually, Pacey, I think, absolutely destroys this little white orange thing here when she finds the odor, which is of course not ideal, right? If I'm going to take the dogs into a nursery, I cannot have them just clawing at things. But for the sake of this, we were just looking at whether they could find the odor, not whether that dog would be some dog we would actually deploy in any capacity. And so this was us trying to start putting it in a new, what's called the kind of diffused hide. So the egg is actually sort of in this little bucket thing down here. And when it's open like that, the odor kind of comes out in lots of different directions. It can be more difficult for the dogs. So where did all that get us? Yes, we got to the end of the study. Yes, the dogs could do it. Yes, it seemed like they could do it outside as well. And so because of the successes of the pilot study of those 3 dogs, the Department of Agriculture in Pennsylvania purchased and trained a dog, Lucky. So for Essler of detection, that's Lucky with her handler, Shane. They were trained by one of our trainers, Brenna, who works with chronic wasting disease now, incidentally. And so they trained Lucky on this, and they did train her a little bit differently. They focused a lot more on sort of individual eggs rather than just the background odor, because we found that the background odor for the most part didn't give dogs a huge issue if they had been imprinted specifically on the eggs. And so Lucky did really well, had no issues, was trained over the course of, I want to say it was 8 weeks. And then as far as I'm aware, is doing really well and sort of helping at trying to reduce the spread of all of these things, which is really great. And so for me, it's really nice because usually what we end up making of our research is just papers, which nothing wrong with that. But it was nice to see sort of a direct application of what we were doing. And Lucky was a great dog, so it's just great to see her go into a good job. There have been some studies since that paper, so I don't want to, imply that Penn is the only place trying to work on these things. So the Canine Olfaction Lab at Texas Tech, which is where Dr. Nathan Hall is, has done a couple of studies also looking at kind of confirming and looking at the threshold of dogs detecting SLF. So what they used was, you see on the right here, so this is actually taken from their paper. So these are olfactometers, which is is a much fancier presentation of the odor than we have, but the same concept where the odor is either there or not. And so they were able to also train the dogs on SLF with a lot of different background odors, almost certainly more than we used. And then they actually looked at a second study to look at sort of what the dog's threshold of finding SLF, so sort of how much SLF had to be present in the air, so to speak, for them to detect it. And of course, that threshold increased, so they needed more when there was a background odor, which is really important because, you know, we know that background noise can affect dogs' olfaction, right? So if I ask my dog to find something, it's harder than trying to find something with a lot of other odors behind it. But it's always nice to confirm that in other studies, especially a study like this, where if I'm searching my dog in a field or a vineyard or anything like that, there's a lot of background odors, a lot of bark, right? So yes, there might be a lot of eggs, but the primary odor there is going to be trees or bark. And then somewhere in there, a master's student, Hannah Decker, so she was actually interestingly an intern at Penn at one point. She did her master's thesis in Virginia, which is again where they had kind of this little population of spotted lanternflies that is not sort of on it's not connected to the groups that we have up here. And she was looking at using pet dogs, testing them and looking at their ability to find these eggs. And they actually trained the dogs outside, which is great. So they use cinder blocks, other relevant scenarios. So these pictures are actually taken from her thesis, which is freely available online. Actually, I think all of these papers are freely available online, but if you can't find them, email me, which was great, again, because these are the places that the eggs are going to be. And this was really great because it allowed us to consider that pet dogs, especially those that might have previously trained in nose work, though that's by no means a requirement, might be sort of a community science scenario where people in those local communities train their dogs and can work towards fighting against this spread of the eggs. And in fact, that is what some people are actively trying to do. So yes, SLF is a significant threat to multiple agriculture industries. So even if you don't consider that having invasive species is bad, period, it is also an economic impact on humans and people in those industries. Unfortunately, even though, I could have this whole nice talk, yes, detection dogs are great, they're a good tool in this fight, we already have way too few dogs in the US. So even in industries where there is a lot of funding and pushing, so explosives detection dogs are a good example, we already have way too few in the US. So suggesting that we can take just more detection dogs for this is potentially not reasonable for a number of reasons, but a big one being that we just don't have access to a lot of detection dogs, at least from the stereotypically working dog pipeline. But again, Hannah's work and work from other researchers recently, maybe pet dogs and nosework dogs are quite feasible for the task. And so Nathan Hall and some others are working on investigating this feasibility. So I think they are recruiting dogs that have been trained in scent work, so AKC, NACSW, or maybe just people who are also just interested in training the dogs on this. And I put the link here. So they have a webinar that's on YouTube that sort of explained what they're trying to do. There's also a QR code here, which will take you to their sign up. And yeah, they're really trying to kind of turn this into a community science thing. A lot of people have been really interested. Even when we first started this study, a lot of people were asking us, how can I get involved? Can my dog get involved? And the answer is probably yes. And that's certainly what these other researchers are trying to do. And so I'm not involved with them. So if you ask me, I'm going to just send you to them anyway. But if you need their email or contact info, I'm happy to give it to you. But this is specifically looking at, whether they can use community science for it. What if you don't have a dog? What can you do? So you can, in Pennsylvania, of course, support the spotted lanternfly spotting. So if you see them, you can relay back where you found them. This is always really important for invasive species work, to track the spread. And so, it might seem like a very small thing to say, hey, I found a spotted lanternfly in my yard for the first time ever. But it's really big. I remember when I was in New Jersey and I saw a spotted lanternfly on a tree for the first time ever. I saw it before Toby, incidentally. I was devastated. It's really bad. And so, give them that information so they can see where they need to pinpoint things. Of course, we always say, if you see them, scrape the eggs off, squash the bugs, do what you can to get rid of them. But again, if they have spread to your area, especially, I think it was the first year, maybe the second year they came to our area, I would have been spending 40 hours a week just trying to kill these things. And so, yes, if you can do that. There's also a number of ways you can try and put traps onto trees, but be very careful. So when this first started happening in Philly, at least, people were putting tape around trees, which does work, right? Because the spotted lanternflies crawl up the trees, but tape does not make a distinguishing decision between whether it is going to tape the spotted lanternflies or any other insects or birds or snakes or anything. So some of these traps now have like netting over them or anything else. And there are also traps that, kind of funnel literally the bugs into a bag and things like that. But there's lots of different creative ways you can use, but be careful, because anytime you put a trap in the wild, you won't just be catching spotted lanternflies, and we definitely don't want to do more damage to other species. So yeah, these are my references. I think they're all open access. If not, feel free to email me and I'm happy to send you any of it. I actually didn't cite myself, my own paper here, but I'm happy to send that as well. And then I guess at this point, I'm like almost exactly 10:45, so I did well. If you have any questions, I guess we'll do some now. And then if you think of any later, or you're watching this recording later, feel free to email me. That's my current university email. If you find my pen one, it does still work, though I'm not sure for how long. And I'm also on Twitter, just because it's kind of an academic thing these days. But if you don't have any questions, thanks for listening. And yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. That was really interesting. And I really appreciated all the videos and just your personal experiences. It was a really great presentation. So thank you so much. We did have a few questions come through as you were talking, so I'll go through those in the order that they came in. We have the first question is from Mike. He's asking if the sessions for training dogs happen once a day or multiple sessions per day.
So I think the most we would ever do in a day is 2 sessions. And it was always with multiple hours between them. But it was typically not more than 1 session. I think Grizzly might have been the main one that would have multiple sometimes, just because his handler was not always there with him. Usually a session consisted of 10 trials. So they weren't very long. And so we were able to get, 2 in a day fairly easily, with a long break in between.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Mike had a second question. He's asking, does the age of a dog affect its ability to learn to identify the SLF eggs?
That's a good question. So I don't think that we can answer that with any of the current research. I mean, you could talk about, how dogs' olfaction may decrease with age, but typically other things decrease first, right? So it's sort of like in humans, sometimes your body gives out before your brain, and I think in dogs it's the same thing, right? Usually dogs are retired because they are physically unable to do a job well before their olfactory system decreases in any meaningful capacity. I want to say Pacey was maybe 7. Which isn't old, but it's senior age technically for dogs. Toby was very young. Grizzly was probably in the middle. So yeah, I guess I can't really say, but I'm gonna say probably not, unless they're to the point where they just can't physically do the task or have less interest in it. Like when my dog hit, 10, she was just over doing anything that she didn't feel like doing. So
Understandable. And then I had a question. I was wondering, throughout the course of your research and the research that's being done by other people, are there any particular breeds of dogs that are proven to do well in the field of detection? And then to be kind of more specific, are there certain breeds that do well with wildlife detection versus human remains detection versus explosives detection? Like Toby, the Munsterlander, and Grizzly, the German Shepherd, versus, the lab. So I'm just curious if
Yeah.
that research has been happening.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like we should all sort of combine forces in the different fields and discuss it, because one of the problems you get with this is you just don't have enough dogs from each breed to really say it, right? Like Toby's the first small Munsterlander I think that's ever done this. And certainly he's good at it, but maybe not the dog I would pick for like in the field because he's very sensitive. I think in conservation detection, it does take maybe a little bit similar to search and rescue, a very, very particular type of dog, because you need a dog that can typically work off leash around a lot of distractions very readily. And so, yes, if I have a dog at a vineyard, maybe I'm not seeing a lot of different animals necessarily, but I might, right? Like if a squirrel comes across, I need to make sure that my dog doesn't like dart across the street. And so I think in conservation work, border collies are really heavily used. So herding dogs that work very close with people and have a history of ignoring other species of animals. But I don't know of anyone that studied it. And then, for the typical detection dog, people think of Labradors. There's maybe two reasons for this. One, they're easy to work with and very biddable. And the other one is they're not scary, right? So, for example, TSA is moving heavily away from pointy-eared dogs because they're intimidating, even though they can do the job. And they're actually leaning more heavily into pointers now. So same concept, friendly looking, easy to work with, high drive. So I don't think there's really a breed bias, except for that, some breeds have kind of been tried and true. And you can source a lot of them, right? So if I wanted to start something and say, I'm going to work with only small Munsterlanders, you can imagine the difficulty of choosing a breed that's not common, and then I have to pick good dogs versus picking something like a lab, which is much more common. The flip side of that is in Nathan Hall's lab, so the Texas Tech lab, they actually use shelter dogs. So they use dogs from their local shelter where they source them from. They bring them into their lab and they train them, and then they also train them in house skills and they adopt them out. So it's a very, very good cause. And so those dogs are, who knows what breed, they're just from wherever on the streets of Lubbock, Texas. And so there might be some breeds that you might say, yeah, I'm kind of stacking the deck in my favor by picking this breed. But between Nathan's work, Hannah's work with the pet dogs, I don't think there's any reason to think, any breed couldn't do it. It's interesting because we host AKC scent trials at my university, and the range of dogs that come in and do really well on detection tasks is actually quite impressive. And so, I think it might be interesting to look into that once this starts becoming maybe a citizen science or community science situation, is actually looking at like what breeds of dogs are doing well, like what breeds people are bringing in that do well. It's a common question. I wish I had a better short-winded answer for it. The answer is usually I think it's more the personality than the dog than the breed, and certain breeds just have a tendency to have certain personalities more often.
Well, and it's interesting you commented about, like the TSA is looking for the friendlier looking dogs when you're in an environment where there's a lot of people. So that's interesting to hear as well.
Yeah. And I know when, at Penn now they're doing the chronic wasting disease, where they're looking at deer feces in the field, and, they needed dogs that could work off leash in areas with lots of animals. And, even when you're talking about just Labradors, that does take a very specific type of dog. And so it's more task dependent. But I do think that conservation might be that sort of exception to the rule, and that I tend to see a lot of border collies and herding dogs in that field, probably because the behavior is just as important as, anything they're doing with their nose.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I just want to mention that there was a few things that came through in our chat. One from Cynthia, and she is reminding me that there is a storybook that she and some others wrote about Lucky, who is the dog that's been working with Shane Phillips at the PA Department of Agriculture. I don't believe that book is out yet, but it is, I think, coming. So Jenny, if you have any other additional details or knowledge about that, feel free to comment. And if not, we can maybe share that out a little bit later once that book is available.
Yeah, I have to admit, I did get the information from you, but like I said, I had some changes in my job at the university, and so the last few weeks were chaos for me. And so I did email them last night, but I didn't get a response. But not because of them, definitely because of me. And so I'm excited to read it and see what's going on. I think, like I said, a lot of the public is really interested in how, what even is this, what's happening, and how do I help? And so I think, movements towards that side of stuff is really important, right? It's nice that I can write academic papers, but it's not like the average person just goes on PLOS One and looks at spotted lanternfly papers, right? So anything that can, help bring this to the community level is always super important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'll wrap up by saying we do actually have Shane Phillips on the
I saw
webinar
that.
today, who is the handler for Lucky at PA Department of Agriculture, and he commented thanks from Lucky. So Shane, thank you for being here today. I don't see any other questions come through, so I think that's everything for now, but Jenny had her contact information up, so if anyone has any additional questions, you can feel free to reach out to her directly. And Jenny, I'll just say one more time, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate your presentation, and I think everyone else did here too that was available to attend live. So thank you for your research and all the work that you and others have done in this field. It's obviously very important, and we look forward to hearing anything more that might come out in here, and hopefully we can get more detection dogs that are out doing this work, because it's super important. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely. Well, have a good rest of your day, everybody. I'll be sending out the recording here sometime either later today or sometime tomorrow. So keep your eyes peeled for that. So thank you, and take care.
Thank you. Bye.